Dear students, I will talk about the rise of middle class in the Middle English period. I hope and expect that by the end of this session, you would be able to understand how there was a rise in the middle class during this period and how this rise of the middle class was linked or associated with or interconnected with the development in the English language in this area. Well, my dear students, a serious question at this time point for us is, what helped English to recover its former position or its former prestige? And probably there can be two general answers to this. A, improvement in the conditions of the masses. B, rise in the middle class as a substantial group. Well, as a matter of fact, the times were changing from the Old English language times to the Middle English times, especially to the early Middle English times, and then from the early part of the Middle English time to the second half of the Middle English time. Over this whole course of time, over this whole period of time, there were changes in the socio-political conditions, and the aristocracy that had all the limelight, now it had less of that prestige attached to it. Masses or common people or ordinary people, for the first time, they were emerging on the socio-political scene and they were gathering importance. My dear students, I hope you understand that the importance of a language is directly, very directly related to the importance of the people who speak it. Well, English in England was spoken by masses, by the common people. Now that there was a change in the socio-political condition, and now that due to the advancements in the world, these masses gathered importance, of course, the language that they spoke also gathered importance. Thus, this was a time for the beginning of the importance that was given to English in the coming years. Well, during the latter part of the Middle English period, the condition of the laboring classes were rapidly improving. There were shifts from the rural areas to the urban areas. There were shifts from the purely agriculture culture to the culture that was more industrial. Among the rural population, villeinage was dying out. I hope you understand what is villeinage. This is more like we have tenants in our rural areas who work with the landlords, whom we call muzare. So, they are dependent. They are, for the most of it, they are dependent upon their landlords. They are dependent upon those nobilities for whom they work, for their life, for their living, and for everything. Now, this situation was decreasing. This was gradually shifting towards, it was moving towards a fixed money payment as a substitute for the day's work in England in those days. The process by which these changes were brought about was greatly accelerated by an event that occurred in 1349. And what was that event? The event is generally known as the Black Death. Well, it was the summers of 1348, and I'm talking of southwest of England. The first cases of a disease that in its contagiousness and fatality exceeded anything previously known in human history were reported. The disease spread with a speed for which we did not have any precedence in human history. It spread rapidly over the rest of the country, reaching its heights in 1349. The epidemic resulted in killing so many people that it was rightly named as Black Death. 40% of the people who were working in churches, that is the clergy, they died of this plague. Death rate during the plague approximated 30%, some other studies say. Anyways, the effects of such a great calamity were naturally very, very serious. Why mortality was greatest among the lower social orders is a significant question for us to consider. Well, whenever there is plague or there is an epidemic or there is some natural calamity, whether it is in one part of the world or the other, most of the times the poor classes suffer more. For the simple reason that they have less resources to take care of themselves. They cannot segregate themselves. They cannot isolate themselves. Thus, to avoid, to shun, all the impact of that epidemic. Same happened in England, and most of the people who died were from the lower class. Of course, it had some socio-economic impact. What was the impact or what was the result? The labor class, these were the people from the labor class who died. So there was a shortage in the labor. People who were easily available for work before this, now they were not available. Now, because the number of the labor class was lesser who were available, it automatically led towards a rise in their wages. And this led towards the rise of the middle class or the lower class gradually. There were certain influences or there were certain impact that the Black Death created. There was a general spirit of discontent. Of course, so many deaths around, so much suffering around, it led towards a feeling of discontent, of unhappiness. It also culminated in the Peasants' Revolt of 1381. Now, this led towards, again, a shift from the agriculture culture to the culture that was more technicality-based, that was more based on industry. Increase in the importance of English language also came along with this, because the poor people who were on the social ladder, who were climbing up, with them English language was climbing up in its status as a language and competing other languages. Rise of the craftsmen and the merchant class was another aspect of the impact of the Black Death. By 1250, there had grown up in England about 200 towns with populations from 1,000 to 5,000. Now, these were small towns. Each of these towns had its own, independent political system, independent government and administrative system. These were the areas that were not only wealthy, they were independent, and they were socially very, very stable. These towns became free now because they were, they were using their own systems of imposing taxes, thus gathering economic resources for themselves. They were less dependent upon the aristocracy or the nobility. Gradually, they were engaged in trade or in manufacturing crafts. Each town had now a new class of people emerging who shifted from this lower class or the middle class to the upper class and became a kind of nobility that was somewhere between, the lower class and the traditional aristocracy. So they were more like, sometimes, as though we use it in derogatory sense, but sometimes we use burgher class in our society. So, the class that, with the help of the money that is earned, rises and gains a higher status. Such changes in the social and economic life benefited particularly the speaking of English in this area, and English language found it advantageous for itself because this was a bigger, size of population, these masses who were now speaking English.